Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, no more glasses. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going pretty good. I mean, I can't lie to you, Patrick. I've been having dreams recently of hundreds of women wearing the same exact thing with 3DSs tethered to them, marching through
Mark,
an auditorium.
No, here's the thing. That was no dream. That is the subject of today's episode.
That
We are
can't
going to be
possibly
talking
be
about-
true.
It is true. It is like 200 mostly blonde women walking through the Nokia theater. It's horrific. There's so much about this that Nintendo's 2010 E3 presentation that I had not remembered, and so much of it that I was not happy to be reminded of. But we'll look. We can get to all of that in a second. But before we dig into the main topic of the show, we just wanted to kind of keep engaging on the levels and the levers of power that we believe we can pull. We were talking last week about getting involved in local politics, understanding what's happening, and trying to make a difference in some way there. Mark, you brought up something before we started recording that I think it's good to talk about.
Oh yeah, so like I guess I just wanted to plug the 2020 census. If you're in the US, like every 10 years, there's a nationwide census, and the importance of the census is that this is one, how representatives of the House of Representative are like divvied up. And so if you live in LA County, it is presumed that LA is going to lose a representative this census just because like population changes. And then second, kind of following up with what we talked about last week about getting involved locally. So the census also determines where literally billions and billions of federal dollars are going to be directed. And so you want to complete the census so that way you make sure that like you are accounted for, and the government knows like, oh, like there are so many people in LA or wherever you live, we should send so many dollars there. And then once you've completed the census, that's another reason to be involved locally, because you can help determine where those billions and billions of dollars are going in your city.
And some of the people that are hardest to count are some of the people who stand to benefit the most from having those dollars directed towards your communities. The homelessness numbers just came out in LA recently, and it's nearly 60,000 individuals are experiencing homelessness in LA County right now, and that number is expected to get way bigger in the fallout from people not being able to make rent due to loss of employment due to COVID. So it is we are definitely in a time where all of that is going to matter in huge ways. So make sure that you're able to fill out the census, and that you are helping other people to do it, reminding other people to do it. It's 2020census.gov is the website, and you can just do it there. And it's super easy, super fast. I did it, took like a minute. So yeah, do that, and then use that as a springboard to get involved and understand how your city would, your town, your state, whatever, would use the money that helps direct towards the communities that need it. And then this has nothing to do with communities that need anything, but if you would like to borrow my copy of Sonic Forces, you can. All you got to do is send us an email to Nintendo Cartridge Society
at gmail.com.
And give us a mailing address where we can send it. You can play it for as long as you like. Is the program still in its hiatus? Yeah, it is. The program's still in hiatus.
I mean, technically, maybe this is just the new normal for the program, and so it's not really in hiatus. It's just like, this is what the program is, and then it is you getting on a list to eventually borrow a copy of Sonic Forces that is currently nobody is borrowing. Like the
Yes, that's
program
right.
has been in that state before. It's just usually for a shorter window. And so
Right. Yes.
technically the program is proceeding as usual.
I mean, yes, technically true. I don't really want to hang on a technicality, but if you like, we could say that the Sonic Forces borrowing program has turned into the getting on a list to borrow Sonic Forces program.
I like this because being like right on a technicality is the worst form of being right. And
That's
so
correct.
we should just make that technicality truth, and then we don't have to be right in that. And we make the rules, so it doesn't matter.
This is a great point. The point is, you should get on the list because someday maybe you'll get to maybe you'll get to borrow my copy of Sonic Forces. Mark, there is no E3 this year. You know this. I know this. That means there is no Nintendo E3 presentation. There's no E3 Nintendo Direct. Even any chance that we thought we were going to get one, people have said, nah, it's just not happening. So we are using the entire month of June, E3 month, to travel back in time, not literally, to explore the E3 presentations of Nintendo's past. We've already done 2004. We've done 2006. Today is 2010, and next week is 2011, the reveal of the Wii U. So if you would like to, do a little homework, get ahead of the game, watch that 2011 presentation, and then like email us or tweet at us about that presentation, that would be cool. We like to interact with you guys, and you do a good job of pointing out things that we are too dumb to notice. Would you say too dumb, Mark?
I fear that I would. Yes.
Last week we were talking about the 2006 presentation, which was the reveal of the Wii, right? And so we were talking a little bit about Excite Truck being sort of a go nowhere game and series. And then I was confused about the control scheme in Twilight Princess. Well, Paul on Twitter, whose Twitter handle is something. Hold on. Paul C. Pace wrote into us and said, Excite Truck has a sequel on Wii called Excite Bots, and it was also very good. Thank you for pointing that out. We forget about everything in the Excite series except versus Excite Bike. We know that one. And then also mentions, I was wondering if the Twilight Princess demo still had Link left-handed. If they hadn't flipped the world yet, that would explain why the Shield Bash would be on the Wii remote in the right hand. Paul, that is correct. This was before they had just worked out, one of the things about Link is that he is a lefty. But in the Wii release of Twilight Princess, they had the whole world flipped. The entire game, left was right and right was left, just so Link could hold the sword in his right hand, which is how you would be holding the Wii remote in your right hand. And that is exactly how they were playing, or that is not how they were playing. Link's sword was still in his left hand in the demo, which was only, 5 months before the game came out. Well, at what point in development do you think they were like, "Oh, we can flip this"?
Yeah, it seems nuts that, like you said, it was only 5 months before release, and they were demoing it at like the biggest video game stage, with it, and maybe they had already made the decision at that point, but like the demo was too late to do it.
Yeah, it's all just very strange. Although, I mean, I guess if they had something working and they could demo it, they were already leagues ahead of where they ended up in 2010. Without further ado, Mark, let's get into our main topic today. Let's talk about Nintendo's 2010 E3 presentation. As we have done in previous weeks, Mark and I recorded some predictions for what we thought this presentation was about. So let's listen to those now. I only remember one image from this presentation, and it is human beings with Nintendo 3DSs tethered to them walking out on stage and like in front of the stage so that people could play the 3DSs without like without running off with them.
That is funny because that is a tradition that carried through to at least like E3 2014 or 2015. Um, I wonder if it actually was 2015, because I was standing in line to play the demo for Star Fox Zero, and there were like Nintendo reps walking around with a 3DS tethered to them so people could play um what is that, like Pokemon S game from Factor 5 about like the goat, Yokai
Yeah,
Watch.
Yokai
Yeah,
Watch.
the first Yokai Watch. So yeah, that is an indelible E3 3DS image, is it being tethered to Nintendo reps for sure.
How much do you think this presentation will be about the 3D, the glassesless 3D functionality of the 3DS?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really remember anything from this presentation. It feels like to me that is going to factor in hugely, because it was like the big differentiating factor of the DS to the 3DS, like so big that they included it in the name.
Yeah.
Um yeah, but I'm curious to like how much time they're going to spend on the 3DS at all. Or like, right, is that like the bulk of the presentation? Because I
Yeah.
don't really have a good memory of like how much did we know about the 3DS at this point. Like by the time it comes to E3, is it kind of like they're doing the last big blowout before release, or is this like a reveal?
Yeah, well, and also like where are we in the Wii's life cycle at this point, right? Like is it still at like the height of its powers? Is this us like freaking out about like Mario Galaxy 2 and like like I feel like this is before the like the cresting the other side of like the Wii being just like a graveyard for games that aren't playable, by people who've never played games before. Um, yeah, I really don't know.
Yeah, this one I'm really excited for, because I do feel like it's like the least memorable, or at least the one that I remember least of all the ones we've
Yeah.
done so far.
Games I expect to see on the 3DS. I expect to see Star Fox 64. And the one where you're a submarine. What's that called?
Steel
Diver.
I 100% expect to see Street Fighter 4 and Resident Evil like Revelations, and possibly Mercenaries, which was its like own release on that.
Wow. All right, this is good. I think you and I have no idea what we're about to watch. Let's get into it. It seems like we were pretty much fixated on what your dreams were.
Well, but we were. I think this was maybe the closest we came in our predictions, and I think it's because you were right that they were all about, when it got to the 3DS. There were actually a lot of game reveals in the first half of this for Wii that I forgot about, but when it came to the 3DS, they like were all about the 3D. In previous episodes, we've talked about how these console reveals are all the same. They're always like, it's all about the games. And this reveal is the exception that proves the rule, because they talked about like 2 games. And the rest of the time, it was just like explaining to people how wondrous 3D is.
Yeah, and like how much of like their proof of support for the 3DS was like, look at all these companies that are bringing games from other platforms over to, like, they name check Resident Evil and Metal Gear and like Saints Row and like all this stuff that like these aren't like new cutting edge games. It's like it's Port City USA or Port City Japan, I guess. I'm not sure. But it is definitely not. They were not putting the experience first on that. They were putting the visual experience first.
Which I don't know how much of it we should talk about like right now, or if we'll get there when we get there. But
I think we should probably talk about it when we get there. Just because there's so much before. There's so much before the 3DS.
Totally fair.
I was shocked. First of all, again, why are these presentations 75 minutes long? They're so long.
This one felt especially long, and there were actually moments in here where I was just like, "Oh man!" Like, it is my notes. It just says like, "Oh, like I'm so glad they do Nintendo Directs now." Just like moments of like people walking across the stage where you're just like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this is like 15 seconds of nothing that now, like doesn't exist.
Yeah, we are the first game that they show in this is Skyward Sword, and we are a full 19 minutes into this presentation before we're done talking about Skyward Sword. Like, that is how glacial this thing moves.
Well, it's not
is
helped
so
by the
slow.
fact that like Skyward Swords does not demo well. They run into a lot of technical problems. But before we get too much into that, I do want to say that like Reggie comes out at the very beginning, right? And we commented back in the first E3 episode we did in 2004 that or we didn't do it in 2004. It was the episode we did just a few weeks ago about the
That's right.
2004 presentation. And Reggie's like suits are fitting much better in 2010. And I don't know if that's just because like changes in fashion and men's like cuts of suit in those 6 years, and like 2010 is much closer to it is to now, to like what men's suits are cut like now. I don't know. I just thought it was worth pointing out.
It is also possible that in the 6 years since 2000 before, Reggie has transformed from like precocious boy into man, right? And so like he brings less of the sort of like aggro energy to this one.
Yeah.
And I think is also like he seems to be going through like a little bit of a transition period where he's maybe becoming more exec and less presenter, because like, while he does overall a pretty good job here, he botches a couple key moments here, including later calling Disney Epic Mickey Disney Epic Disney. But he also just says a bunch of things wrong throughout this. There's one time where he tries to exit the wrong side of the stage, turns around and goes the other way. It's just like, I don't know if like the Skyward Sword demo like got in his head or what, but like, he's not as super smooth in this as he is in previous presentations.
And I think that is definitely true of like the presentation as a whole. Which really, let's talk about this Skyward Sword demo.
Okay, so we open with Reggie. We're at the Nokia Theater, and Reggie's already starting to throw down the gauntlet of like, the buzz around E3 is the technology, touch screen, HD, motion control, button control. He's really doing like his best to be the like, the Barnum and Bailey, like he's the ringmaster at this, right? And then he's like, I want to adjust that perspective a little bit. Technology is only a tool, and the best experiences come when technology and game design are perfectly matched. And it's such an ironic statement for him to make like minutes before the technology is going to fail game design. So the Skyward Sword trailer, like the little opening tease, is kind of super cool, right? Like, it starts with showing different links from various eras of Zelda. We see like Ocarina of Time, we see Majora's Mask, we see Wind Waker. There's a little pop in the audience when people see that Toon Link. They love him so much. And then there's like the first solid look at Skyward Sword Link, and yeah, that's really like where the like the first look at the game, where it wraps up and we see Miyamoto on like a giant video screen, and this is a weird turn. Mark, I don't know how you how you like this thing, but it's Miyamoto in a video, and then he tosses it to Bill Trinen, who is on the stage and is about to like demo how the game works, and then Screen Miyamoto starts like trash talking Bill, and Bill's like, huh? And then the screen goes dark, and then Miyamoto walks out on stage and takes over demoing for Bill Trinen.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Well, yeah, I thought it was I don't know. I guess it's always fun to see Miyamoto, and I think, like, they knew that was true, right? Like, you have an audience of like game journalists and people who rightfully like love him, and so the video's nice, but and Bill Trinen, cool guy, but like seeing Miyamoto on stage, that's what everybody wants.
I mean, absolutely. I just don't get why the psych out of like, Bill's going to do the demo. Oh no, Bill can't do it. Here comes Miyamoto to bail him out.
It's one of those things that, the little touches of humor that would play better in a direct when they could actually like edit it, for like
Yes,
that comedic
yes.
timing. But I do want to talk about one of the things that Miyamoto says in this like intro video, where he's like, I think this game will be remembered as a key turning point in the Zelda like series history. And
Yes.
at first I was like, man, I don't think it turned out like Skyward Sword turned out that way. But actually, I don't know that that's true. I think you actually could mark Skyward Sword as like a real turning point for the series.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't agree with you, but I want to just throw in this other thing that he said about it before they like get into demoing it. I don't have the exact quote here, but he says something along the lines of refining the interface of the sword and shield, using the sword and shield and the map. That those are like key components of the Zelda formula, and their goal with this game was to make it so that you could use them freely and naturally. Um, but what makes you think that you could consider Skyward Sword a turning point for the Zelda franchise?
Well,
It's
I
almost a dead end in my mind, which I
right.
guess is
No,
a
I
form of
completely
turning
agree.
point.
And like that's almost where yeah, that's like where I ended up, where it's like, yeah, it is a key turning point in the sense that I think they kind of hit like the limits of a lot of what they could do, right? Because like you look at Skyward Sword's art direction, you look at Breath of the Wild's art direction, and I don't know, like I wasn't privy to development, but I can see a line between the two and how Breath of the Wild is
Sure.
just like a better, like more refined version of it because they like the hardware was just like so much incredibly better. Like the stamina wheel, like that plays such a big part in Breath of the Wild, that comes from Skyward Sword. Like I really yeah, like Skyward Sword totally seems to me like one of those games where they just butted up against the limitations of what the traditional Zelda formula could do. And so like after the fact, they just kind of had to like tear it down to its studs and rebuild. Um but, so having not played Skyward Sword, like I do think it was interesting to have him articulate exactly what you said, which is that, the goal was to make the player feel like Link, and that they, like were holding the sword and holding the shield. And I think what's interesting about that is like you can see how that like germ of an idea turned into what Skyward Sword is. I just don't know that it was ultimately that successful. Like you're looking at the demo, and it was striking to me how like slow the game played, because so much of the gameplay is about like you controlling the sword, and so like combat and everything is really slow. Like each enemy encounter, like a bokoblin, can take a while because
Yeah.
like you have to match their actions and like swing low if they're blocking high. And just watching it looked interesting, but it kind of looked like a tech demo. Like that part of it like didn't seem especially fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is interesting because like the two things that he says are like fundamental to the Zelda experience are the sword and shield play and interacting with the map, right? And I think all that this demo does is show how you control Link with his sword and shield and his various other weapons. It does not really address how you get around the world, or how exploration is a more like exploration is not done any favors by Skyward Sword, right? The game is notoriously linear. It is notoriously enclosed, and it's just I guess it is a turning point in that it gave like a list of like suggestions of things to avoid in Breath of the Wild.
It is a game where I don't know. It's obviously a big hole in my Zelda vocabulary because I haven't played it. Um, it I don't own a Wii. I never had like Wii Motion Plus. Like all of those things would be barriers to playing it. And then on top of that, it just doesn't look like that much fun.
Yeah. Yep. And also one of the things that they don't talk about in this presentation at all is just how like story focused and how like how long and like how voiced the cutscenes are. You know, it is we will later see a trailer for Metroid Other M, which comes out, you know, like 2 months later. And you know that is a notoriously like talky version of a Metroid game. And it's weird that that was obviously a trend for like Nintendo, like big game development, but they weren't talking about it for whatever reason.
And yeah, and it makes sense because, well, I guess like for two reasons. One, because they're trying to capture this really wide audience, so you're trying to make a Metroid game or like a Zelda game that can be appreciated by like everybody. And
Yeah.
then I think also like it's just a little bit a victim of the times because like games as these big like cinematic experiences was really beginning to like become an important trend right around this time.
Yeah, again, just to call forward to the 3DS presentation, one of the biggest pops is seeing Konami and Metal Gear being listed as having games from that series coming to the 3DS. So that is what people are like. That's where the prestige is. And so that's sort of where like Nintendo is trying to steer at this point, but like for whatever reason they're just like falling short of the mark on a lot of them. I have in my notes here, I hate this demo. It's excruciating. They and Bill Miyamoto via Bill Trinan explains that like everything was working fine in rehearsal. There must be some like amount of interference, but like it just gradually gets worse and worse as Miyamoto is demonstrating sword strikes and aiming with the Wii Motion Plus and all of this stuff. It gets to a point where not only isn't it accurate, it just flat out doesn't work. Where like the cursor is just like scrolling through the sky infinitely. It is really hard to watch.
Yeah, it's hard to watch and really boring.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Hard to watch.
eventually it ends.
Eventually it does end, and it's confusing because like they spend a ton of time in this like just showing like the really fiddly like, okay, here's how you would throw bombs versus here's how you would roll bombs, and then like they come out of this demo, this train wreck of a demo, by showing like a quick sizzle reel of all of Link's actions actually in the game, where everything Miyamoto was trying to demo like 5 minutes earlier are just actually smoothly happening on the screen, which sort of, I mean, for me it's almost like, why is that not just on a button? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But that's I mean, I don't really know what more there is to say about the demo of Skyward Sword here. Miyamoto says that development looks like it's going to take the rest of the year, so you can look forward to playing it sometime next year. Skyward Sword doesn't come out until November of 2011, so they were, they just like we're not going to find out who that Arms character is for another like 2 weeks. Nintendo is true to the timelines they state, but pushing them all the way to the end. And then Reggie's back. So we don't have to, Mark. Let me assure you, we don't need to talk about Skyward Sword anymore.
And Reggie, the way that he like he sets this up here is basically he's going to talk about like three categories of games where he's like, all right, first we're going to talk about like games with universal appeal. He shows a couple of games, then he's going to come back and be like, all right, then we're going to talk about these like bridge games. He calls them intermediate core bridge games, and then finally like some I don't even know, like third party titles, more intense titles, that's what he calls it.
Yeah. So and he starts with talking about sports games, which I feel bad for Reggie in this moment because he's about to try to hype up Mario Sports Mix as a Mario game and a like arcade style, like in the vein of NBA Jam, which he is like, by the way, we have an NBA Jam game coming and it's exclusive to Switch. But he's gonna try to lump this game into that like same sort of arcadey experience. And they show off like a quick trailer for Mario Sports Remix showing volleyball, hockey, dodgeball, and basketball. It's described as pure fun. and I just feel really bad for Reggie in this.
I had a note in my that I wrote down that just said, "Did this release?" And then I had to look it
It
up and be
did.
like, "Yes,
Yeah.
it did." So this is developed by Square Enix, who also developed like the 3-on-3 Mario Hoops game for the DS as well,
Yes.
right?
Correct. And this is also where Reggie goes on like a little bit of like a brag run. Like this is where he starts to do the like, we by the way is selling super well.
Yeah, the very
yeah.
Reggie, like, some people say this, but
Yeah.
this is what's happening. But like you said at the beginning, where like that braggadocio has kind of like gone away, like he doesn't really sell it.
Yeah. Well, and interestingly, these were the sections that would have been under that George Harrison would have come out to do in the 2004 and 2006 presentations. I don't know if Harrison isn't working with Nintendo at this point. But Reggie's just doing it. He doesn't have any charts. He doesn't even have any specific numbers. But he kind of just goes into like knockdown, specifically the assumption that Wii owners just played Wii Sports or Wii Fit and then lose interest. Reggie claims that is simply not the case. And that's when he brings up the concept of bridge games. What did you call them? Intermediate
That's
bridge,
what he calls them,
hardcore?
intermediate core bridge games. So like the idea that these are like people who have come in to play video games for the first time. They play these games that are like not as intuitive or simple, I guess, as like a Wii Sports. And then they use these as a transition to those more complex titles. But the ones he brings up are like Mario Kart and New Super Mario Brothers Wii, which I guess would fit that definition. They must have the data to prove that those are core games.
I mean, well, but I think he is right in that they are games that like the super casual player will also engage in with someone who is a core player, right? So like, I've played both of those games with people who don't really play a lot of video games. In addition to something like Wii Sports, I don't think they would ever pull out Mario Kart Wii on their own, but are happy to do it when they're hanging out with me. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So this is what brings out the first like new bridge title, which is Wii Party. Mark, I'll tell you, this is another one that I had to go to the internet to be like, does this exist? Did it come out?
Yeah, I
Sure
totally
enough, it did.
Yeah, I totally forgot about Wii Party, and I yeah, it's interesting to me that they are touting this as like one of those transitional games, because to me it seems very much just kind of like another like Wii Sports or Wii Play, but I don't really have anything to say about this. It's just like, oh yeah, I guess this existed.
Yeah, totally. Reggie says that games like Wii Party drive social interaction, which is his transition into talking about Just Dance 2, which was a Wii exclusive. Is that right?
I'd believe it, because like before Connect, what else were you gonna play it on?
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I have such fondness for the Just Dance titles. I'm old now, so I don't know any of the music in the current ones, so I
Right.
do not enjoy them. But I have lots of great memories of the early ones, so it was fun to see it like touted as like a big Wii exclusive.
And it should also be noted that if you wanted to buy the most recent Just Dance game, you could still buy it on Wii. Just Dance 2020 that came out like a couple months ago, came out on Wii.
Yeah, last one.
Remarkable. Weird pivot to start talking about hardcore games. Golden Sun Dark Dawn, a little 3DS game just DS game thrown in here. It's just a regular trailer doing the the JRPG thing that you hate, Mark, of like, except it's no voice acting. It's just like some text on the screen.
Yeah.
Kind of mixed in with like some shots of gameplay, including what I can only imagine were distressing signs of like moving blocks around via the touch screen. It's again just like it just sort of sucks a little bit. And I also had a moment of realization here that like I don't envy Nintendo having to show off dual screen games in a format where like there's just big green bars on either side and like two separate boxes stacked on top of each other with like the gameplay inside those little boxes. Just so much of the screen real estate gets eaten up for to preserve the aspect ratio.
Yeah, totally. And then right after Golden Sun, they do a game that, again, like when they showed it, I was like, oh my gosh, this was such a good idea. Like, I know why they pursued this, but
Yeah.
I don't think anybody cared when it came out. It was the GoldenEye 007 from Activision, which was like a remake, kind of reimagining of the N64 GoldenEye that, they touted having like the local multiplayer as well as online multiplayer.
Which couldn't have possibly worked. Yeah, and they're leaning really hard on the nostalgia for this one. And the whole thing opens with like a focus group, which isn't even really a focus group. They're just trying to get reactions out of these people, but it's staged like a focus group where there are a bunch of people around a table, and someone's asking questions like, "What would you say is the most foundational console multiplayer shooter of all time?" And people are like, "Oh, GoldenEye." And then them being like, "What if I told you there was a new GoldenEye?" And then people flip out. And yeah, I just like you, Mark, I don't really remember it having any sort of. I remember the announcement being a like, "Whoa," but then the actual release of the game just being a total thud.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think you're right that like there just isn't really, I just don't think there's an appetite as much for like this sort of thing on Wii because what GoldenEye did, like that idea of like this like multiplayer game, it had evolved so much and was available on like so many other platforms
Mm-hmm.
that I just don't think that like the audience was there for it. And it probably didn't help that the game was just like a little bit mediocre, but it especially didn't help like looking back on it now where you're like, ooh, these like realistic trying looking games on Wii like
Yeah.
do not look good.
It's also so we're in 2010, which means we're in a post Casino Royale world, right? Um,
Oh,
so like
no,
the
it was totally. It's in the parts that they showed in the cutscenes. It's 100% not Pierce Brosnan. It's
Yeah,
Daniel
it's
Craig.
Daniel Craig.
Yeah,
Which is like I don't know, so much like it's just weird to be like, oh yeah, GoldenEye. The all of the having just watched all the James Bond movies since quarantine started, like the tone of each actor who plays Bond is so different that like trying to just drop Daniel Craig into GoldenEye is a conceptual nightmare, right? It's just trying to it's just demonstrating that like Nintendo's trying to bring back a like hardcore game concept on a not hardcore game console, using an IP that has also moved on from what it used to be 20 years ago. Like the whole thing is just like an atemporal mess, right? Like it just doesn't make any sense. But I guess good to have Activision supporting the platform.
well, and like again, like at the time, like watching this trailer again, like it made me smile because I'm like, this what? Like I get the idea. Like the idea is solid. Like that's a fun idea. Um, but I think like when it came down to it, there just wasn't the demand for like the finished product.
Yeah. And then after that, Reggie intros Disney Epic Mickey, which is of course a Mickey Mouse game. Who developed this, Mark? I don't have it in my notes.
Looking Glass Studios, I think, it's headed by Warren Spector, not the music producer slash murderer. Um,
Which is
uh,
good. It's a good note. It's a good note.
but yeah, like he's an industry veteran, and this is another game where like clearly the ambitions, like when it was revealed and the concept art were like huge, and it eventually I think just got like pared back and compromised to like he comes out and he is talks about how excited he is to be able to like build this game based on like old Disney theme parks and abandoned Disney theme parks, and like like he's clearly a big fan of Disney history, and I was really excited for this game. Um and they do like a big demo here, and he talks about how like it's all about like play style matters and like all of these like really big sounding I think ideas. But when the game came out, like you've talked about in the past how one of the most fun things about Mario, like just making Mario run brings you joy, but like Mickey wasn't that fun to control. Like he was kind of floaty. You have to use him in
Yeah.
these like side scrolling components, and like the platforming controls aren't all that great. It just was like compromised in too many angles, and rewatching this demo just reminded me of that.
Yeah, the demo itself looks really good, right? Like it, especially coming right off of the GoldenEye trailer, where like the more stylized Mickey,
Mhm.
like that art style, made a lot more sense. I think it was definitely running on not a Wii. Like it must have been running on stronger hardware. Because it just looked cleaner. Like I think there's no way that game actually looked like that when they put it out.
Well, it's also hard because like they or and like all these games, like Skyward Sword was the same thing where like um they were showing it in widescreen and all this stuff, which was possible with the Wii, but was not
Yeah,
like it didn't ship with. It didn't even ship with. There was no HDMI. It didn't even ship with component cables. You had to buy those
yeah.
separately, and by the end, they were hard to find. So it's like, yeah, I think for like, if nothing else, for like, at least 90% of the people who owned Wii's, yeah, the game looked nothing like that.
Yeah. And I already mentioned this that as Reggie is introducing Adam and Warren to come out, he says that they're here to present Disney Epic Disney. He also is describing Mickey, and he tries to say world renowned, but like the words are just garbled. Like I don't know. Like he must have just been in his head at this point, and I believe this is when he tries to walk off the wrong side of the stage, turns around and walks the other way. Um, Mark, this is a reference for probably just you and me, but Adam, the guy who was demoing Epic Mickey as Warren was describing it, looked like a Tim Kalpakis character to me. Tim
I see it.
Kalpakis, one of the birthday boys, super square jaw. Um, yeah, that made me chuckle. Okay, play style matters. God, it really did seem like this game should have been right up my alley. But much like GoldenEye, just sort of fell short of whatever they expected uh, whatever they expected the end result to be.
Well,
Okay, next
I
we're
mean,
moving on.
it
Well,
did end up
yes,
selling pretty well because they had a sequel that was
they had a
multi-platform. So
sequel.
like,
Yeah.
I think it sold well, but Disney started getting out of games around like the time of the second one, and I just don't think it really captured people's imagination the way that they hoped it would, for sure.
It's a killer concept. Like that's something that I wish they could like re-explore now, or even re-release now, like remaster now. It would just be cool to. I don't know. I feel like we're in a much more reflecting on lost stuff time right now. Like nostalgia might be stronger now than it was in 2010, and especially around like Disney ephemera. Um, yeah, it just makes me think that like the time for Epic Mickey wasn't in 2010, and it's probably in 2020. Not that it'll happen. Then we move on to Kirby's Epic Yarn, which is introed by Reggie with a series of yarn and crafting puns before he even reveals the name of the game is Kirby's Epic Yarn. Um, there's not really too much to say. He shows the trailer and says you'll find that it's not the way it looks, but the way it works. And he does not specify what he's talking about in that. These main selling points of Kirby's Epic Yarn are the way it look like that is the way it looks. That's why you play the game. It's adorable and the art design is amazing.
It it, it is it is adorable. Like when Kirby turns into that car and he's making that little beep beep sound.
Meep, meep.
It's very cute.
And then we move into Dragon Quest Nine,
Woo
which
woo.
had been out. Whoop, which had been out in Japan for a little bit, and it sold 4.2 million copies. And that leads into all sorts of like bragging about numbers, which is a super weird way to talk about games in 2010. Over 300 monsters, Reggie says. And this is basically just the lead into, and it's coming out in the US on July 11th. But I believe that release date was either already known or like that release window was already known, because it gets no reaction,
Yeah,
none whatsoever.
it was already known because they hyped Dragon Quest IX pretty good, and I loved this game. You know, he talks about the multiplayer and how that plays a big part into it, and that is true for a lot of people. I played it completely solo and still loved the game. He also talks about like tag mode, which it basically was like Dragon Quest Street Pass. And when we get into the 3DS segment, they talk about like the difference between what the DS could do and what the 3DS could do. But it's just
Yeah.
interesting to remember that like the DS had like a Street Pass type thing, but it was game specific. So if you wanted to do it for like Nintendogs or Dragon Quest 9, you had to like have Dragon Quest 9 as the game that was on your system and then have it in sleep.
Yeah, which is, yeah, it's just so specific. But I mean, also the 3DS didn't have like a hard drive, right? Like it was just reading the game that you couldn't down. There was no store on it, right?
On the
On the
DS?
DS.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not until the DSi.
Outrageous. And then we move into Metroid Other M, which again, this isn't the reveal of it here. The game is coming out just 2 months later, or a month and a half later, at the end of August. Reggie mentions that isolation and desperation have not been lost, but they are pushing the emotional depth of whatever gameplay. Who knows? It's just sort of a quick touch with Metroid Other M. Do you have anything to say about that, or do you want to get into Donkey Kong Country?
We should talk about Donkey Kong Country, but it's a fun, like Metroid Other M. We didn't know at that point, right? So it was a fun trailer. The music is so good, and like looking back on it, it's a little disappointing. But at the time, I was super hyped.
Yeah, and everyone wanted a new Metroid. Which Reggie uses as Metroid. You know who made some good Metroid games? Retro Studios. We asked them what they wanted to make next, and they said Donkey Kong Country. And it is teased sort of expertly with just the music first, the very recognizably Donkey Kong Country music. People love this reveal, right? The reveal of Donkey Kong Country gets a big pop. And there's no mention of how, whereas Skyward Sword spends a ton of time talking about how you're going to control the game, Donkey Kong Country Returns trailer, no mention of the motion and waggle controls that are present in this thing. So it seems like they just don't talk about it a lot, right? They just like show the trailer and then move on.
Yeah, and it was, I think it got like the biggest applause of the presentation. And especially when you find out it was coming out just a few months later at the end of the year.
Yeah.
I smiled through this entire trailer. Like you said, like the music made me so happy. It reminded me how cool those sunset levels like looked at the time, and how good they still look. Like man, it made me so happy that Donkey Kong Country is back, and it made me want like Retro or somebody to make a third game. I'd love to play another one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that bummed me out watching this trailer 10 years removed is that title sucks. The title of the game, Donkey Kong Country Returns, like kind of cool in the moment when the game comes out, but now like going back to it and being like, this is Donkey Kong Country Returns. It's the fourth game in the like, what is this? What are we doing? It's like calling the new Super Mario Brothers games new. Like it just doesn't work after a certain point in time when new is old.
Yeah. Yep. Totally.
All right. Okay, then look, we've been talking about Donkey Kong, we've been talking about Kirby. That's the past, man. Now it's time for us to talk about the future. 3D play on the Nintendo 3DS. And Reggie goes into full-on trash talking mode. First of all, they showed like a kind of like sizzle reel about like the journey of 3D technology, which is strange. There's like a point in it where it's like 3D discovered and it's like 400 AD or something. It's very this little like package here is funny, and stops at like 2009 or 2008 whenever Avatar came out, and it's just like article after article, like 3D explosion, everyone loves 3D.
Well,
And
that
it's
is
yeah,
so my question with the 3DS. Looking back on it now, is like obviously when Avatar came out and was like this huge event, and then for the
yes,
next at least like 2 years or 18 months, like 3D movies, a lot of them did well, like that Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland, partly
yeah.
because they were in 3D. Like that was an event, and it really did seem like 3D was going to have this huge resurgence. And so obviously Avatar, like the 3DS had to have been in development before Avatar came out. So was Nintendo working on this, and then it just became like seemingly really like fortuitous timing, and so that's what they made like all of their focus around, was the fact that it was like glassesless 3D, that it was like the future of 3D.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is a weird, like the 3D is already a little bit of a weird thing to hang your hat on, and then like on top of that, the glasses-less 3D, as though that was the one thing that everyone was just like praying for. I wish we could watch 3D stuff without 3D glasses.
Well, it is interesting. Like, I mean, did you own a 3D TV?
No,
Yeah, so
no,
like
never.
I bought a TV from like a friend, like cuz they got a new one, and so like I bought theirs in maybe like 2014 or 2015, and it was a 3D TV, and it came with like a pair of, or two pairs of, like 3D glasses that like I never had any use for, because by the time I bought it in 2014 or whenever it was, like the fad was already gone. Like they weren't really releasing content for
Yeah.
it, like so this was like such a short window where everybody was like so excited about 3D. um I don't know, it's just so interesting. It's that part of it is so interesting to me, because like by the end of the 3DS's life, like the 3D was completely just like an afterthought.
Yeah, and a lot of games like the Pokemon games at the end, Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, didn't even have 3D. Like you just couldn't even turn it on.
Yeah.
It did. They don't care. It doesn't matter. Um, and yeah, the one of the things, and just sort of to your point about like never having like anything to watch in 3D, that is one of the things that Reggie's talking about, that they're prioritizing, was making sure that they had a bunch of 3D game content available for the first day on the market. But the 3DS launch is notoriously thin game wise, right? That there were a lot of games that weren't ready, or that they were slow to get to market. That's why they had to do like the 3DS ambassador program to thank people for
Well,
buying early,
so I think that the
and there was a
3DS
price drop.
Yeah, I think the 3DS Ambassador program was more around pricing, because because the 3DS was really expensive when it came out. It didn't sell hot right out of the gate. So they dropped the price not much later. And so I think the Ambassador program was more about like thanking people for buying when it was so much more expensive.
Yeah.
Like I actually think the 3DS launch was not bad, and Iwata even talks about how uh the Nintendo had to do, people didn't really believe in the DS and they didn't really believe in the Wii, so Nintendo had to do a lot of the groundwork themselves, but that for the 3DS they had a lot of more like third party support. Um and so I don't remember the 3DS launch being like terrible. I think like Resident Evil Mercenaries was on it, and like Street Fighter 4 and some other stuff, but like they don't talk about games in this at all.
Yeah. So let's get to the first game that they do talk about. Oh, actually, before we get to that, Satoru Iwata has come out at this point, and he's describing the 3DS and why it's exciting. And there's an improvement to the graphics and to the input. There's now the slide pad, and like gyroscopic like tilt controls in the 3DS. And points out the two camera lenses that let you take 3D photos, which also gets a weird pop from the audience. Like they seem to be interested in taking 3D photos. And then Iwata mentions 3D movies, and he name checks Disney, Warner Brothers, and DreamWorks, and that you could see 3D trailers on the 3DS for like How to Train Your Dragon, Tangled, and something else.
Guardians of Gaul.
There we go. that you would be able to see those on the show floor. Mark, do you remember if any of these came out? If they put out movies on the 3DS?
I don't think they put out. I have no memory of them putting out full length content.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting that here and in the 2004 presentation they were talking about like releasing episodes of TV shows for the Game Boy Advance, which just, all of this is so funny and just not at all why people use these use these systems. But like I remember actually seeing those episode carts, game cartridges in stores. I don't ever remember seeing 3D movies.
Yeah, I don't either.
Which then leads into a little bit of a hype up of Masahiro Sakurai's Project Sora, and the first game that they are putting out, which is a game built from the ground up for 3DS, and of course is Kid Icarus Uprising.
This trailer has such awesome music. This is a fun trailer.
This is a great trailer, and like the room is there for it, because the room at first, like before you see Pit, is like, what is, like, you can feel that the crowd is like sort of on board but like doesn't really know, and then they see Pit and they're like, oh my god, it's Kid Icarus. Which is just such a cool like show of faith for like how well that character is treated in Smash, right? And watching this trailer made me wish that there was a version of this game that was like playable without having to rely on the touchscreen for combat, because that really makes the game borderline unplayable.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you know, like in this is really just a reveal trailer, and they don't talk anything about like the like grip thing that you could buy that added an extra like circle pad. And they don't. That's what that did, right? Or am I thinking of something else for Kid Icarus?
So there was a stand that you could buy that was like sold, that came with the game. But then there was also the Circle Pad Pro, which like added another circle pad onto it. I don't know if that came out right away or later.
It must have come out later, like for, I think it was for Monster Hunter that they ended up doing it.
Great point.
But yeah, but it's interesting that in E3 2010. There is no gameplay that you can do for yourself at all. They said that on the show floor you can see a 3D trailer, but yeah, they weren't ready to talk about how this thing plays at all at this point.
Which again, in stark contrast to what we just saw for Skyward Sword, where they can't wait to show you how much swinging the Wii remote, making the Link swing the sword around, like how immersive that is. This game, they are not talking about how it controls, and it, like, reflecting on it is just so strange that this is a game that they, like, that Project Sora was put together to design a game for the 3DS, right? Like, not to design a game and then figure out where to put it. It was designed for the 3DS, and like this whole team was put together. Masahiro Sakurai, like golden child of Nintendo, and then they make a game that doesn't play well on the 3DS, that like doesn't use its tools in a compelling way. It's just it's fascinating.
I think it's interesting, like inadvertently, and we almost maybe should have done these E3s in reverse, so we were leading up to ones that were a little more fun, because like you know, these last two, and I guess I'm projecting a little bit because I haven't seen the 2011 one, but I just feel like we're the 2010 one. We're at this really weird period in Nintendo where they're beginning to make those like little missteps, like the 3DS is an amazing system, but it has a rough launch, and it's like the price is a little bit wrong. I know that 3D was really like a lot. Everybody was talking about 3D around this time, but I don't know that a ton of people had like real enthusiasm for it. Like it's like all these like incremental missteps that it's painful to watch it happen.
Yeah, it absolutely is. and like even though like some of this does sort of work, like this thing isn't like a total they're not taking a total bath here. Like they're talking through Street Pass comes next, right? And talking about how as you were mentioning on the DS, if you wanted to use the sort of like network features in like idle mode, that was all software specific, but that it was happening on a hardware level for the 3DS, so you could just close your 3DS and it would connect with other players and their information about other games that the two of you are playing together, or the Street Pass games, would just be communicated between the machines. And they say without you knowing, which is a little ominous, but is also like, I don't know. It's Street Pass was all I always thought was cool, and I always wished that I was playing it when I lived in a city where I was like taking public transportation.
Totally.
Or that I was like going to school or whatever, and like that would have just been a fun thing to collect, Street Pass stuff on day to day. Then and also, of course, that there is no monthly fee for the 3DS online network, sort of continuing a Nintendo thing that would be uninterrupted until the Switch. And then Nintendogs and Cats gets announced, and the audience groans and then applauds.
That is right, out of obligation. It's also weird because this
Yes.
is literally the only Nintendo first party game that they talk about for the 3DS at this show. I guess
mean,
other than
outside of
other
Kid
than
Icarus.
Kid Icarus, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that is a strange launch lineup. Nintendogs and Cats and Kid Icarus. But then they start going through the list of third party publishers. There's like a big graphic with all these logos on there, and it is a pretty good list. And when they start going through individual developers, we see like Square Enix is coming with a Kingdom Hearts game, Capcom with Resident Evil, Konami with Metal Gear, and then everyone laughs at the THQ slide which says Saints Row on it, because everyone suddenly has to deal with the thought that there would be a Saints Row game on a Nintendo handheld. But I don't know. I sort of like this thing, and then followed by the like interview reel with developers talking about the 3DS.
Yeah, very similar to what we saw with like the reveal of the DS, where they're talking about how like the 3DS is going to be a game changer. With the hindsight, or with like the benefit of hindsight, it's funny to see Metal Gear Solid on there, because what we ended up getting was like a version of Metal Gear Solid 3 that like nobody was really happy with. But it is like, I mean, that's cool. Like, who would have ever guessed that you could put a Metal Gear Solid game on like a handheld, like, or on that it would show up on a Nintendo handheld. Like, that's really fun. But yeah, like I think even here, the 3DS I think shipped in early 2011 in the US, but even here you begin to see like kind of the struggles that Nintendo has just in general with like, how do you sell a 3D system when its big selling point is the fact that it's in 3D, but you can't how do you illustrate that? How do you illustrate the fun and benefits of that unless you're watching it in like like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, seeing really would have to be believing,
which again is just like not like, for me personally, was not why I bought the 3DS. Like I would be interested in talking to someone who bought it because it could do 3D. Like, yeah, I honestly can't remember even what it was that made me buy one in the first place. But like, just because it's the new Nintendo handheld,
exactly.
right?
And like, look, like we're not talking up the great things about the 3DS here because they don't talk about them in the presentation, because the 3DS is an amazing system, like, and there were so many good games on it. But it reminds me a lot of the Apple Watch, where when the first one was revealed and it came out, right, they were taking their best shot at what they thought people wanted. Like, would it be cool if we're sending each other heartbeats? Would it be cool if we're doing all this stuff? And then it took them a while of people actually using it for them to figure out like, oh, like, people care about this aspect of it, so that's what we're gonna like focus on. And I feel like the same thing happened with the 3DS.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. So then Reggie comes back to sort of close out the show, and then at this point actually like puts up a graphic on the screen, sort of recapping all of the games that they talked about in this presentation. And again, these are all games for either the DS or the Wii. And honestly, when he says them all back to back like this, and it's not stretched out over the course of an hour, the list is kind of compelling, right? It's Skyward Sword, Mario Sports Mix, Kirby's Epic Yarn, Donkey Kong Country Returns, Disney Epic Mickey, Dragon Quest IX, Golden Sun, Golden Eye, Metroid Other M, and Kid Icarus Uprising. I was wrong. There was one 3DS game in there. It's a lot of big first-party Nintendo stuff. It's a lot of just exclusive to Nintendo platform stuff. But like for whatever reason, the whole presentation feels really like flat and slow to me.
Yeah, I think it was a pacing thing, and again, like I feel like we're so blessed that Nintendo Directs exist now, because those things are like 45 minutes and they're packed, right? There's nobody walking across the stage, or like there's a part where Iwata, this like pillar slowly rises out of the floor, and then like there's a 3DS standing on it. But even from the angle that they're shooting it, it seems so small and insignificant. So I can't even imagine what it was like being in the Nokia theater. And you're like, what's going on? What's happening? And then Iwata like holds it up. And then he like walks to the center of the stage. And it's just like 15 or 20 seconds of just like dead air. And that like takes like all the excitement out of the announcements. Because you're right, like lined up like that, like it's not a bad lineup. I think this is the last year that we would see anything like this. But in and of itself, not too shabby.
Then we go to a cute little 3DS trailer that is, I guess, like an attempt to dramatize what Glassesless 3D is like. But in reality, it's just showing different Nintendo execs being sucked into the 3DS, right?
Yeah,
this is such a weird thing. So like there's some Zelda stuff that we see in that, which I mean there wasn't like a Zelda game coming out imminently on the 3DS, so whatever. There's like Nintendogs, right? Like Mr. Miyamoto like shakes the hand of a dog who like comes out, and then they both go into the thing together. And then Reggie shows up, and Bowser. And so this is presumably from Super Mario 3D Land, right? Which hasn't been teased or mentioned or anything in any other capacity during this presentation. The Bowser comes out of the 3DS, breathes fire, and melts Reggie. And then when we come out of the video, Reggie's jacket has been burned. Which is cute.
It's cute. It's cute.
And at that point, Reggie's like, okay, but that still didn't do it. We're still not communicating what the power and the like novelty of the 3DS actually is. So the only way to do it is to put 3DSs in your hands. So bring out the 3DSs, and it is like swarms, a back line at the back of the stage, another line at the front of the stage. Got to be at least 200. Like I said, mostly blonde women with 3DSs like stapled to their sides, so that people could play them there before the journalists were bussed to wherever they were going next. And then there were also Wii consoles up at the front of the stage,
like 4 of them,
again rising out of the ground. Yeah, like 4 of them, so people could not get Skyward Sword to work the same way that Miyamoto couldn't. And it's a sort of soft end to the presentation.
It's
right?
a soft end, but like also a really bizarre one to be watching. Like, why broadcast this part? It's so
I don't
weird.
know.
It is so unsettling to me to see this veritable like army of booth babes like stream from the back wearing identical clothing, like with these 3DSs like tethered to themselves. I did not appreciate this part.
No, and con culture at the time, especially video game con culture at the time, and even now and always, is bad and sexist in a lot of ways. But like then like this whole Mark, you used the phrase "booth babe," which was just like a thing that they would do, is just like hire models and actresses just to hang out at booths and be like eye candy for gross pervs. And like it's weird to see Nintendo engaging in that same thing for this part of the presentation.
Right, with their like I always with their like still, like wholesome Nintendo image, but it's just like, yeah, this is
Yeah,
just part of the deal. Like this is what these trade shows are. I always think of
yeah,
like that I can't remember which show they go to in The Simpsons, but there's like the woman standing next to like a sports car up on the stage, and like people fill out the like sweepstakes slips, and
yeah.
Homer's like, "Do you come with the car?" As he drops it in, and she's like, "Oh, you." And then a guy comes up
Right.
and does the same exact thing like after Homer.
Yeah, disgusting. It's super gross.
Also, where like
And
look like where are the hot booth like
where are
booth
the booth
guys?
boys?
Yeah, the booth
Yeah.
boys. That's right.
It's an excellent question, and like it just also there are a few women in the lineup that aren't blonde and aren't white, but very
Very
few. Like
few.
it is not a diverse crowd, and so like the whole thing is just like, like who marched this like Aryan buffet of.
I
It's
know, it's
gross.
so
I hate
weird.
it.
Truly unsettling because, like you said, there's like 200 of them, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. It's so weird. It's so weird. I can't stress how much how like creeped out I was by
Yeah, and we wouldn't be talking about it so much
it.
if we didn't also hate it. Okay, Mark. So we have reached the end of the 2010 presentation. In our conversations about the previous two, we were like, "Yeah, go check this thing out. It's interesting. It's a good watch. It's fun. Nintendo has very clear and focused, and it's obvious what they're trying to do, and philosophically what the whole company is about." Do you feel that way about this presentation?
So the thing that I think is interesting about this is that they are like um I feel like they're still pretty clear and focused. Like Reggie comes out at the beginning and is like, here's my thesis statement for this Wii section. Or right, like, and here's what you're gonna see and here's why we're doing it. And then same with 3DS. They're like, here's the deal with the 3DS and here's why we're doing it. The thing that I think that sets this one apart from the other two is like the other two we hear what they are saying and we were like, yes, this makes sense, and two, how right they were. And then
Yeah.
now this presentation you begin to be like, I guess this makes sense, or like what you're saying, like I understand your point of view,
Hmm.
but like I have very little enthusiasm for it, and it's
Yeah.
interesting to see that like transition happen.
Yeah, I mean the whole idea, the whole selling point that like you want to play 3D games or take in 3D content, but without those dang glasses, the premise is just false. Like, I think we experienced something like Avatar in 3D because it was like the new novel way to like watch the thing, and then I think a lot of us saw 3D movies after that as sort of like. I mean, where you're like, oh, did you get tickets for the 3D one? Oh, shoot, I did. And you're like, okay, well, we're going to see the one in 3D. I remember going to see the first Thor movie, and like going to the theater and realizing that like the one we were going to see was the 3D one, and changing our tickets for like a later showing so that we could see it in 2D. Like, I just don't think it was ever outside of like a few very specific instances, it was just never a draw
Well, that's
and
why
wasn't going to be a draw for this.
I'm really interested like in the alternative history where Nintendo rolls out the 3DS and Avatar did not come out, and like the 3D
Mm,
movies were not a success, and so they were not positioning it like, because in this presentation they it's treated as a given that people want 3D content and love 3D,
yeah.
but the piece they don't like about it, the limiting factor, are the glasses. And I would be really curious to see like if like the state of the world was not that, like when Nintendo was developing the 3DS internally, Avatar had not come out, so nobody knew
Yeah.
that 3D was going to be like the this like having this like explosion of eyes on it that it ended up having. So it's like, what does that 3DS rollout look like when they weren't piggybacking off of the like temporary enthusiasm for 3D?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean that is a great question. And it's also like I don't know, the fact that you would need glasses for anything else, but also the 3DS glassesless technology asks just as much discomfort of its user as wearing glasses. Like you have to hold it in a very specific place for the 3D effect to work, and they get around that in the new 3DS. Also, if you're wearing glasses, like forget it, like you just can't get it to work. So like they yeah the premise of like the demand is false and even the premise of the delivery is false. um and it's weird that they don't know that just being like here's a new more powerful DS is selling point enough of its own.
It makes me super curious to see what the Switch's successor is going to look like. Like, will Nintendo be content in just doing a like super Nintendo-esque where it's like it's the thing you love but more powerful? I'm so curious.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean and that is a great point because I feel like the NES to the Super NES is the only time that Nintendo's done that. Like the same thing but more buttons and more powerful. Like the Nintendo 64 is such a departure in controller style. I guess maybe the Nintendo 64 to the GameCube is a pretty lateral move.
And the
like,
Game
along
Boy
the
to
same
the Game Boy
lines.
Advance, like, is like a
Yeah.
similar step. But I totally understand what you're saying. Like in modern Nintendo history,
Yeah.
we really, I mean, it's been what, like almost 20 years since the GameCube came out. Like it has been we have seen Nintendo in like every generation they reimagine themselves, and that's an exhausting position to be in. And
Yeah.
like we were talking about with the PlayStation 5 reveal, it's like Sony's in a really comfortable place and they don't feel the need to like reinvent themselves. And I just don't know if Nintendo can feel comfortable doing that.
Okay, well, that's what we thought of the of Nintendo's 2010 E3 presentation. We would love to hear your thoughts, your reactions, your remembrances. Were you one of those 3DS ladies? We would love to hear.
Oh
from
my
you.
gosh, please, yes.
Please, what was that experience like? We just want to know. You can email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at
gmail.com.
Or you can tweet at us at Nincart Society. All right, Mark, let's close this out. That's going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Remember, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts if you like the episode. You can share it on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you share stuff where someone might see it. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at Nincart Society. And the Facebook page is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Eller saying there's still 4 more Avatar movies coming. And thank you for listening.
Have you ever encountered an unexplained hairy bipedal hominid in the woods?
Have you received telepathic messages from an unidentified aerial phenomenon?
If so, then you need to listen to Bigfoot Collectors Club. I'm Michael McMillan.
And I'm Bryce Johnson.
And together with super producer
Riley Bray,
we make up the Bigfoot Collectors Club.
That's right. Every week we talk to actors, comedians, writers, and paranormal experts about their personal paranormal histories and share stories of high strangeness.
Like the time when we talked to Craig Ferguson about the Loch Ness Monster and when a sea witch told him he had raven magic.
Or the time I asked Pitch Perfect's Anna Camp her opinion on cattle mutilations. Past guests have included Rachel Bloom, Jen Kirkman, Paul F. Tompkins, Bobcat Goldthwait, and more.
So if you've ever been abducted alongside 5 reindeer by an alien with drills for hands or witnessed Bigfoot crawl out of an interdimensional portal,
Don't laugh, happens all the time.
then check out Bigfoot Collectors Club on Campfire Media or wherever you get your podcasts.
Bigfoot Collectors Club. You're here to believe us.
wait, is that how it goes?
Campfire.